Exodus 9. Then the Lord said to Moses, "Go to Pharaoh and say to him, 'This is what the Lord, the God of the Hebrews, says. Let my people go, so that they may worship me. If you refuse to let them go and continue to hold them back, the hand of the Lord will bring a terrible plague on your livestock in the field, on your horses, donkeys, and camels, and on your cattle, sheep, and goats. But the Lord will make a distinction between the livestock of Israel and that of Egypt, so that no animal belonging to the Israelites will die.' The Lord set a time and said, 'Tomorrow the Lord will do this in the land.' And the next day the Lord did it. All the livestock of the Egyptians died, but not one animal belonging to the Israelites died. Pharaoh investigated and found that not even one of the animals of the Israelites had died. Yet his heart was unyielding, and he would not let the people go. Then the Lord said to Moses and Aaron, "Take handfuls of soot from a furnace, and have Moses toss it into the air in the presence of Pharaoh. It will become fine dust over the whole land of Egypt, and festering boils will break out on people and animals throughout the land." So they took soot from a furnace and stood before Pharaoh. Moses tossed it into the air, and festering boils broke out on people and animals. The magicians could not stand before Moses because of the boils that were on them and on all the Egyptians. But the Lord hardened Pharaoh's heart, and he would not listen to Moses and Aaron, just as the Lord had said to Moses. Then the Lord said to Moses, "Get up early in the morning, confront Pharaoh, and say to him, 'This is what the Lord, the God of the Hebrews, says. Let my people go, so that they may worship me. Or this time I will send—'" Exodus 9. Then the Lord said to Moses, "Go to Pharaoh and say to him, 'This is what the Lord, the God of the Hebrews, says. Let my people go, so that they may worship me. If you refuse to let them go and continue to hold them back, the hand of the Lord will bring a terrible plague on your livestock in the field, on your horses, donkeys, and camels, and on your cattle, sheep, and goats. But the Lord will make a distinction between the livestock of Israel and that of Egypt, so that no animal belonging to the Israelites will die.' The Lord set a time and said, 'Tomorrow the Lord will do this in the land.' And the next day the Lord did it. All the livestock of the Egyptians died, but not one animal belonging to the Israelites died. Pharaoh investigated and found that not even one of the animals of the Israelites had died. Yet his heart was unyielding, and he would not let the people go. Then the Lord said to Moses and Aaron, "Take handfuls of soot from a furnace, and have Moses toss it into the air in the presence of Pharaoh. It will become fine dust over the whole land of Egypt, and festering boils will break out on people and animals throughout the land." So they took soot from a furnace and stood before Pharaoh. Moses tossed it into the air, and festering boils broke out on people and animals. The magicians could not stand before Moses because of the boils that were on them and on all the Egyptians. But the Lord hardened Pharaoh's heart, and he would not listen to Moses and Aaron, just as the Lord had said to Moses. Then the Lord said to Moses, "Get up early in the morning, confront Pharaoh, and say to him, 'This is what the Lord, the God of the Hebrews, says. Let my people go, so that they may worship me. Or this time I will send the full force of my plagues against you and against your officials and your people, so you may know that there is no one like me in all the earth. For by now I could have stretched out my hand and struck you and your people with a plague that would have wiped you off the earth. But I have raised you up for this very purpose, that I might show you my power, and that my name might be proclaimed in all the earth. You still set yourself against my people and will not let them go. Therefore at this time tomorrow I will send the worst hailstorm that has ever fallen on Egypt from the day it was founded till now. Give an order now to bring your livestock and everything you have in the field to a place of shelter, because the hail will fall on every person and animal that has not been brought in and is still out in the field, and they will die." Those officials of Pharaoh who feared the word of the Lord hurried to bring their slaves and their livestock inside, but those who ignored the word of the Lord left their slaves and livestock in the field. Then the Lord said to Moses, "Stretch out your hand toward the sky so that hail will fall all over Egypt, on people and animals and on everything growing in the fields of Egypt." When Moses stretched out his staff toward the sky, the Lord sent thunder and hail and lightning flashed down to the ground. So the Lord rained hail on the land of Egypt. Hail fell and lightning flashed back and forth. It was the worst storm in all the land of Egypt since it had become a nation. Throughout Egypt, hail struck everything in the fields, both people and animals. It beat down everything growing in the fields and stripped every tree. The only place it did not hail was the land of Goshen, where the Israelites were. Then Pharaoh summoned Moses and Aaron. "This time I have sinned," he said to them. "The Lord is in the right, and I and my people are in the wrong. Pray to the Lord, for we have had enough thunder and hail. I will let you go. You don't have to stay any longer." Moses replied, "When I have gone out of the city, I will spread out my hands in prayer to the Lord. The thunder will stop, and there will be no more hail, so you may know that the earth is the Lord's. But I know that you and your officials still do not fear the Lord God." The flax and barley were destroyed, since the barley had headed and the flax was in bloom. The wheat and spelt, however, were not destroyed because they ripen later. Then Moses left Pharaoh and went out of the city. He spread out his hands toward the Lord. The thunder and hail stopped, and the rain no longer poured down on the land. When Pharaoh saw that the rain and hail and thunder had stopped, he sinned again. He and his officials hardened their hearts. So Pharaoh's heart was hard, and he would not let the Israelites go, just as the Lord had said through Moses.
It's always been thought that violence and corruption during elections in Nigeria are homegrown problems, ones that Britain tried hard to prevent by bequeathing a system of fair and honest democracy before granting the country independence in 1960.
Look, we are not kids. We are mature people, and the country is mature. We are giants of Africa.
But according to our document, the unpublished memoirs of a former British colonial officer, London's parting gift was, in reality, a lesson in how to rig the polls and deceive the people.
This is the story of evil committed by kind, nice, decent British politicians. They sought to keep Britain from bankruptcy and found a solution in the mineral-rich empire on the point of independence. It was necessary to bend the rules, and sadly, in due course, the rules were.
In 1956, Nigerian children sang to welcome the Queen as she toured some of their country's new democratic institutions. And in January 1960, on his way to South Africa to make his famous speech warning that a wind of change was blowing through the continent, the British Prime Minister, Harold Macmillan, stopped off in Lagos to give the Nigerian Parliament some pearls of wisdom from the world's longest-standing democracy.
So long as we value the freedom of speech, freedom to express our opinions, I know of no better system than a fairly elected parliament for giving people the sort of government they want.
Those who got in the way were innocent, like the colonial peoples, but both had to be dealt with quite harshly.
Back in the 1950s, Harold Smith, an idealistic young Oxford graduate, was settling into life as a British colonial official in the Nigerian capital Lagos with his wife Carol and their young daughter. Important regional elections were to be held that year, followed by a national poll 3 years later, just ahead of independence. Harold had his part to play in the preparations, drawing up new laws aimed at ensuring that Britain left Nigeria an orderly and stable place. But his faith in the integrity of the project was soon to be shattered.
In 1956, I was in Lagos on the staff of the Ministry of Labour when I received the secret file, which had a minute which ordered me to get involved in the regional elections which were taking place. It told me to take all the vehicles of the Ministry of Labour, all the staff, the clerical staff, and as many senior staff as I could find, to act on behalf of the minister. And the chap was called Festus Akoti Igbo, and carry out the ministers, the appointing ministers' instructions, and get his party colleagues elected.
Festus was a flamboyant political figure who'd been appointed Minister of Labour. He was also treasurer of one of Nigeria's main political parties, the NCNC, which had its power base in the east. Harold Smith says he was shocked to be asked to interfere in the election on behalf of the NCNC candidates, standing for seats in the minister's constituency.
To have cars and trucks in the bush at all gave you tremendous prestige. All people had were bikes. If a fleet of vehicles with maybe 30 or 40 staff of clerks and administrators had suddenly descended, they'd have made a very big impact. This was official, this was government stuff.
Why did the British want you to help ensure that this man, or at least his colleagues, were elected?
Because the plan was to put the North in government, in power. The elections were just to be fixed.
A very serious accusation that Britain, which advertised its withdrawal from empire as a model of fairness and democracy, was allegedly rigging, or at the very least, giving advantage to a favoured party in the polls. Can such an allegation be substantiated? I took Mr. Smith's claims to the director of the Centre of African Studies at Oxford University, Professor David Anderson.
In the 1950s, virtually all the British colonies were moving towards independence in Africa, and there were elections taking place everywhere. It would not be unfair to say that in almost every single colony, the British attempted to manipulate the result to their advantage. Indeed, it would be surprising if, as the colonial power, they'd not done so.
At this time, Nigeria was divided into 3 regions, each with distinct and often conflicting tribal and cultural identities. Partition was a very real threat, and given their experiences in India, something the British were determined to avoid. Traditionally, the colonial power had enjoyed a close relationship with the largely Islamic north of Nigeria. This part of the country was more conservative and less developed than the rest. Here, the British operated a system of indirect rule, governing through the local emirs. Professor David Anderson.
The north of Nigeria was not only largely Islamic, it was deeply conservative. And therefore, it was ideologically going to oppose the Pan-Africanism and internationalism that tended to mark southern politics in Nigeria. So for sure, the British saw the north as an important bulwark against what they might have termed unnecessary radicalism.
And the fear of radical political ideas, in other words communism, was key to British policy in Africa in the 1950s.
Communism was thought of as a very serious threat in West Africa, because the kind of socialism it fed upon in Africa was driven by massive poverty and very low levels of education. Therefore, British analysts at the time thought West African populations were vulnerable to communism.
In order to ensure that, come independence, their interests would be represented by their conservative friends in the north, the British had virtually created and strongly backed a political party for the region, the NPC. but it could not hope to win enough votes nationally to win outright. So the British needed to ensure that they had the support of either the Eastern or Western parties. This would explain why Harold Smith claims he was ordered to divert resources to help candidates standing for the Party of the East, the NCNC, led by one of the founding fathers of Nigerian nationalism, Dr. Ezekwe, also known as Zik.
They had to fix Zik, and of course there was stuff they could have got him for, sent him to prison, but they didn't. He was forced to do a deal with the North. This great nationalist had to do a deal with these illiterate peasants in the North, and that's what happened.
Whatever the true motives of the British administration, to this day Harold Smith is adamant that the order to interfere with the elections came from the highest authority in the colony, the Governor-General himself, Sir James Robertson. Recorded here during the royal visit in 1956.
To the Queen's Most Excellent Majesty, I have the honour to offer to your Majesty and to His Royal Highness, the Duke of Edinburgh, our most loyal welcome, and to express our deep and sincere appreciation of your gracious presence today.
He was a thug, and he had a terrible reputation, Robertson. He wasn't talking about people when he talked about Africans. They weren't people, they weren't human beings. We loved Africa. But these people who came in to do this job were a different breed. These were the ex-SOE and MI6, and they thought that they were really tough. And they were.
Smith claims several of his colleagues were also asked to interfere in the elections, and they reluctantly fell in line, leaving him alone in his refusal to obey Robertson's orders. Isolated but still defiant, he was finally granted an audience with his boss at Government House.
I go up and I see him, and the first thing he says, I want you to know that everything that you've alleged about the elections is correct. I'm telling you this because you know far too much, and I want you to know how much trouble you're in. The colonial service is just like the army. You know what happens if you disobey orders in active service, and that's what's going to happen to you. I thought, and I was shot. And this big guy, I was so angry that I really wouldn't have been surprised if he pulled out a pistol and shot me.
There's a huge array of files here. Are these all your correspondence on this subject?
In the spare room of Harold and Carol Smith's home, piles of paperwork fill a large metal filing cabinet, much of it copies of unanswered letters to the great and the good, detailing Harold's allegations.
Doing this for many years.
With no recordings of the conversations he claims took place, and no copies of the orders he says he was given, he's unable to prove the serious claims he's making. The Smiths have fought a long, lonely and largely fruitless battle to have his story heard, but with nothing on paper and all those who could back up his story dead, why should anyone believe him? His wife, Carol.
You're quite right. We have not got written evidence and things we can say, there you are. Well, I know Harold's telling the truth. You either believe us or you don't.
What makes you so convinced that Harold isn't mistaken on this?
I've known him, I've been married to him 55 years. I know what he's like. I know the sort of person he is. I know the sort of values he holds. I don't think I would have had the courage to do what he's done, but at least I've had the courage to stay and support him in what he's doing.
Most of the people were elected unopposed because they tended to arrest the opposition, to exile them and beat them up and sometimes even kill them if they kept pushing their luck.
Academic and novelist Patrick Wilmot taught sociology at Ahmadu Bello University in Nigeria for 18 years. He believes Smith's allegations expose only a small part of the lengths British colonial officials were prepared to go to in the North in an effort to ensure that Britain's favoured party, the NPC, got elected unopposed.
The British were in control, the so-called native authority, the emirs, the local police, all of that was under British control and supervision. These people, they could have been removed, they could have been stopped at any time, but they were actually encouraged because the British wanted to hand over to them and they wanted them to control the northern region, which was the most powerful region in the country.
But you'd imagine that a government may have official control of an area, but it wouldn't always know what exactly people are doing on the ground in terms of the sort of thuggery you're talking about.
The British were completely aware because they had their officials at every level, in the police, the security services, they had control of the army. The key thing was to prevent people from running against you.
What evidence do you have for these allegations?
No, these are not allegations. If you go to Nigeria, everybody, from the professors in the university to the people in the streets, will tell you that this has happened. I mean, there are history books written, but most of these history books will not have the sort of knowledge that people who will talk to you in Nigeria have.
Time to look for answers in Nigeria then. Children play behind the Reformed Christian Church of God in Arima town in southern Nigeria, outside the home of a man who's been part of the struggle for freedom and democracy in Nigeria all his life.
I am Comrade Che I Ibebura. I am now 74 years old. I'll be clocking 75 on November 16 this year.
On the walls are pictures of the leaders of Nigeria's independence movement, as well as a poster of his namesake, the Cuban revolutionary Che Guevara. In the 1950s, when Nigeria was still under British rule, he was a trade union leader and a member of Dr. Azikwe's NCNC, with strong opinions about the real intentions of the colonial power.
By 1956, I was 24 years old. So as at that time, I was an activist. I started to draw political inspiration when I was about 20. You see, I'm from a Christian background and believed in justice. And I know quite well that their intention was not to develop us.
Che Guevara believes that Nigeria's first democratic elections were far from free and fair under British rule, and that little has changed since they left.
Nigerians just got what was already on ground from the British. They started operating from what they saw. Whatever we are trying to experience from Nigeria now was the structure laid down by the British.
Harold Smith claims that he was asked by the country's governor to help ensure that a favoured candidate was elected fits with Che's memory of those early Nigerian elections.
Money was flowing to the north, both from the British government, the supporters from the British angle, and from the Arab world. No master has ever given his slave the opportunity to rival him. Nigeria is a British baby. They can't just allow Nigeria to play their hands freely. Otherwise, why are they colonial masters?
I've been looking through the papers of some of those colonial masters to see what they were prepared to say about their motives and their methods when it came to Nigeria's first elections, and they make interesting reading, like this letter from one Sir Peter Smithers.
I was Parliamentary Private Secretary of the Colonial Office through almost the whole period of decolonisation. I was present at most of the negotiations for independence, including that of Nigeria.
A secret agent, MP and diplomat, Sir Peter was a dashing figure, rumoured to be the model for Ian Fleming's James Bond. And in this letter, he details his part in the shaping of independent Nigeria, and he makes a frank admission about British attitudes to the leaders in the north, the Kano rulers.
The attraction of the Kano rulers was that they had long and successful experience of government. They therefore offered an obvious choice to head the new experiment. It was in fact difficult at the time to see an alternative for the early stages of independence.
Sir Peter died last year at the age of 92. Sir James Robinson, the Governor-General of Nigeria at independence, and the man Harold Smith alleges ordered him to interfere with the electoral process, died in 1983. But again, his memoirs suggest that he did not always play by the rules. Recalling Nigeria's first general election in 1959, he writes that before all the counting had finished, rumours began to circulate that the NCNC from the east and the Action Group in the west were getting together and might form a coalition. Now this would be a disaster for Britain's hopes of the Northern Party, the NPC, taking power. Sir James was alarmed to discover that even though there were a number of seats still to be declared, if the Action Group and the NCNC formed a coalition, they would have a majority in the House of Representatives.
I believe this could be very dangerous for Nigeria's future. As from all I'd learned of the Northerners, they might well decide to leave the Federation, for they would not readily accept a national government of Southern parties.
According to Sir James, as Governor-General under the Constitution, he was required to appoint as Prime Minister the person who seemed to him most likely to command a majority in the House of Representatives. In his opinion, even though the count was not yet over, this was the northern leader, Abu Bakr. And so...
The beginning. 1. In the beginning God created the heavens and the earth. 2. Now the earth was formless and empty, darkness was over the surface of the deep, and the Spirit of God was hovering over the waters. 3. And God said, Let there be light, and there was light. 4. God saw that the light was good, and he separated the light from the darkness. 5. God called the light day, and the darkness he called night. And there was evening, and there was morning the first day. 6. And God said, Let there be a vault between the waters to separate water from water. 7. So God made the vault and separated the water under the vault from the water above it. And it was so. 8. God called the vault sky. And there was evening, and there was morning the second day. 9. And God said, Let the water under the sky be gathered to one place, and let dry ground appear. And it was so. 10. God called the dry ground land, and the gathered waters he called seas. And God saw that it was good. 11. Then God said, Let the land produce vegetation, seed-bearing plants and trees on the land that bear fruit with seed in it, according to their various kinds. And it was so. 12. The land produced vegetation, plants bearing seed according to their kinds and trees bearing fruit with seed in it according to their kinds. And God saw that it was good. 13. And there was evening, and there was morning the third day. 14. And God said, Let there be lights in the vault of the sky to separate the day from the night, and let them serve as signs to mark sacred times, and days and years. 15. And let them be lights in the vault of the sky to give light on the earth. And it was so. 16. God made 2 great lights, the greater light to govern the day and the lesser light to govern the night. He also made the stars. 17. God set them in the vault of the sky to give light on the earth. 18. To govern the day and the night, and to separate light from darkness. And God saw that it was good. 19. And there was evening, and there was morning the fourth day. 20. And God said, Let the water teem with living creatures, and let birds fly above the earth across the vault of the sky. 21. So God created the great creatures of the sea and every living thing with which the water teems and that moves about in it, according to their kinds, and every winged bird according to its kind. And God saw that it was good. 22. God blessed them and said, Be fruitful and increase in number and fill the water in the seas, and let the birds increase on the earth. 23. And there was evening, and there was morning the fifth day. 24. And God said, Let the land produce living creatures according to their kinds, the livestock, the creatures that move along the ground, and the wild animals, each according to its kind. And it was so. 25. God made the wild animals according to their kinds, the livestock according to their kinds, and all the creatures that move along the ground according to their kinds. And God saw that it was good. 26. Then God said, Let us make mankind in our image, in our likeness, so that they may rule over the fish in the sea and the birds in the sky, over the livestock and all the wild animals, and over all the creatures that move along the ground. 27. So God created mankind in his own image, in the image of God he created them, male and female he created them. 28. God blessed them and said to them, Be fruitful and increase in number, fill the earth and subdue it. Rule over the fish in the sea and the birds in the sky and over every living creature that moves on the ground. 29. Then God said, I give you every seed-bearing plant on the face of the whole earth and every tree that has fruit with seed in it. They will be yours for food. 30 And to all the beasts of the earth and all the birds in the sky and all the creatures that move along the ground, everything that has the breath of life in it, I give every green plant for food. And it was so. 31 God saw all that he had made, and it was very good. And there was evening, and there was morning the sixth day. Thus the heavens and the earth were completed in all their vast array. 2 By the seventh day God had finished the work he had been doing, so on the seventh day he rested from all his work. 3 Then God blessed the seventh day and made it holy, because on it he rested from all the work of creating that he had done. Adam and Eve. 4 This is the account of the heavens and the earth when they were created, when the Lord God made the earth and the heavens. 5 Now no shrub had yet appeared on the earth and no plant had yet sprung up, for the Lord God had not sent rain on the earth and there was no one to work the ground. 6 But streams came up from the earth and watered the whole surface of the ground. 7 Then the Lord God formed a man from the dust of the ground and breathed into his nostrils the breath of life, and the man became a living being. 8 Now the Lord God had planted a garden in the east, in Eden, and there he put the man he had formed. 9 The Lord God made all kinds of trees grow out of the ground, trees that were pleasing to the eye and good for food. In the middle of the garden were the tree of life and the tree of the knowledge of good and evil. 10 A river watering the garden flowed from Eden, from there it was separated into 4 headwaters. 11 The name of the first is the Pishon, it winds through the entire land of Havilah, where there is gold. 12 The gold of that land is good, aromatic resin and onyx are also there. 13 The name of the second river is the Gihon, it winds through the entire land of Cush. 14 The name of the third river is the Tigris, it runs along the east side of Ashur. And the fourth river is the Euphrates. 15 The Lord God took the man and put him in the Garden of Eden to work it and take care of it. 16 And the Lord God commanded the man, you are free to eat from any tree in the garden. 17 But you must not eat from the tree of the knowledge of good and evil, for when you eat from it you will certainly die. 18 The Lord God said, it is not good for the man to be alone. I will make a helper suitable for him. 19 Now the Lord God had formed out of the ground all the wild animals and all the birds in the sky. He brought them to the man to see what he would name them, and whatever the man called each living creature, that was its name. 20 So the man gave names to all the livestock, the birds in the sky and all the wild animals. But for Adam no suitable helper was found. 21 So the Lord God caused the man to fall into a deep sleep, and while he was sleeping, he took one of the man's ribs and then closed up the place with flesh. 22 Then the Lord God made a woman from the rib he had taken out of the man, and he brought her to the man. 23 The man said, this is now bone of my bones and flesh of my flesh, she shall be called woman, for she was taken out of man. 24 That is why a man leaves his father and mother and is united to his wife, and they become one flesh. 25 Adam and his wife were both naked, and they felt no shame.